Members, sit down in your chairs. Thank you. Welcome everyone. Today I'm Councillor Scott Pater-Harris. I'm the chair of today's licensing committee. I'm just going to go through some housekeeping. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Assemble near the Queen Victoria statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed into the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be recorded and broadcast on the website, including those who are making deputations. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they are finished, otherwise the camera will remain on you. Obviously, members of the press and public are permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those explicitly stating they don't wish to be recorded. Obviously, as I said, I'm Councillor Scott Pater-Harris. I'm quite happy to go and do introductions, so I'm going to go to my left.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Ben Attrell, I'm a solicitor employed by the council. I will be advising the committee today.
Nikki Humphreys, licensing manager.
Ross Lee from the licensing service.
Simon Potter from Adams Morey.
Thank you, Councillor Jason Zackley, representing Nelson Ward.
Leon Madden, Councillor Nelson Ward.
Councillor Daniel Weems, Hilsey Ward.
Councillor Linda Symes, Eastern Cranes Ward.
Councillor Tom Coles, Fratton Ward.
Councillor Charlotte Drada, Central Southsea.
Yenka Deniro, Charles Dickens Ward. Sorry.
Councillor George Madge with the Paulsgrove Ward.
Peter Sutherland, elected Uber representative.
Nizam Ahmed, Taxi Trade Rep. Thank you.
Shahaduddin, Hackney Taxi Trade Rep.
Bruce Hall, General Manager, Aqua Cars.
Ben Swan, Copner and Anchorage Park.
Councillor Lewis Gosling for Copner.
Dave Ashmore, one of the Fratton councillors.
Councillor Stuart Brown, also from Fratton.
And it's a full house from Nelson. Councillor Lee Hunt, representing Nelson Ward.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. We have one apology for absence, don't we, Anna? Do you want to? That's Councillor Kimberly Barrett, who is got Councillor Hunt standing in for us.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Councillor Hunt.
I know it is.
Members, do we have any declarations of interest? Lovely. Agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. They've been circulated. Are members agreed? If we're going to go through the pages of those minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you. I will sign those off. Thank you. Moving swiftly on, members, agenda item 4, which is the Peace Plan Clauses Act 1847, Part 2, Local Government Miscellaneous Provision Act, Hackney Carriage and Private Hire Matters, amendments to adopted Statement of Licensing Policy. We do have some deputations today, members, so I'm going to go to those deputations after we do the report from the licensing manager. So over to the licensing manager, and then we'll hear the deputations.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. You're here this afternoon to consider the recommendations numbered 1 to 37 in the report attached as Appendix A to this report, and to note and determine amendments to your policy as it stands today and as you feel appropriate. And there is also a recommendation that the amendments will come into effect from the 1st of April 2023. Members, I don't propose at this outset to go through every single 37 recommendations for you, as I know you would have probably have already had regards to those before today. Just as a general information, your current policy was adopted in 2016. There have been amendments along the way due to statutory and other considerations, but there are, they were amendments to that policy. Full Council has given this committee full delegated approval to take overall responsibility for the policy and for you to make any future amendments you feel are appropriate in accordance to the licensing function. The report details to you members that you considered this item and these recommendations in July 2022 and you instructed me to consult on the proposals that were presented at that time. I can confirm that consultation was undertaken and the information received in response to that is attached to your papers as separate documents and Appendix C, but it is also contained there is a summary in Appendix A which highlights the responses against each recommendation where those questions were specifically asked. So the consultation has been done. You have in 4.2 of your report some basic summary data as to what representations you've received in relation to that. Surprisingly, you may think you actually had 74% of the consultation responses were from members of the public. In overall terms, having a look at the data, those that responded agree overall with the recommendations that you're considering today. We have amended slightly the documents and the recommendations based on that consultation, and I will go through. There's only 4 that we've recommended changes to the original recommendations, and perhaps the most important one for the trade today and for members is in relation to the question on the upper age limit for licensed vehicles. You will recall that that original recommendation was to increase the age limit to 12 years for wheelchair accessible vehicles, to encourage them to encourage proprietors to maintain those as part of your fleet, and also recognising the cost implications for proprietors when purchasing those sorts of vehicles. However, you have received many responses from the trade, and I presume that's from licensed drivers and hackney carriage proprietors, because you got no response from vehicle proprietors at all in the survey. But they are asking for your support to extend the age limit for all licensed vehicles to 12 years as opposed to 8 years. And you will see in the recommendations, and I'll go through that in greater depth as to how that has been proposed to you today. So if I can refer you to the sections that we're going to suggest amendments to. The first one, and this is in the Appendix A document, that's page 24 of your bundle. Oops, if I can get there. This relates to paragraph 4.2, licensee self-reporting. The recommendation that the statutory guidance made to this particular aspect of your policy suggested that licence holders should be able to give 48 hours notice should they have been charged or arrested in relation to any relevant offences that are set out in the beige section of that paragraph. And we do require that notification already, but we ask for it within 24 hours as opposed to 48 hours. The original recommendation to you, members, was to amend your current policy to reflect the statutory guidance. So that would have taken it from giving 24 hours to 48. However, if you look at the consultation response, you there was a disagreement that the overall response by the consultation suggested that they would prefer the 24 hours notification to remain rather than the 48 hours. So that recommendation has now been amended, members, to reflect that response. And we have also added, given that arrests may be made on a Friday or on a prior to a bank holiday, that we've said within 24 hours or the next working day. So that has gone against what the DFT have recommended, but I would ask you to consider the responses you've had from that consultation and whether you're happy to implement your own policy in relation to that timeline. Next recommendation is on page 29 of the bundle. And that relates to the training of decision makers. And this is in relation to your training annually for sitting on the licensing committee. There was overwhelming support for that training received as a result of that consultation. And the recommendation for you is to whether you want to consider as a committee that you will mandate that any member wishing to serve on the licensing committee should attend training on a mandatory basis. And that would be every year. Next one is page 33. That's recommendation 21. And this relates to the relevance of convictions in determining the suitability of an applicant having regard to previous convictions. I refer to the appendix because that sets out what the proposal actually is for your final policy, which is on page 47 of your bundle. And you will see that Appendix B sets out those proposed guidelines that you're asked to consider this afternoon. There have been amendments to that the relevance of convictions, and this is on the basis that you currently have in your policy reference to convictions under the licensing legislation. You have stated that you will have a policy on how relevant that is in terms of suitability if people can get convicted of offences under that regime. That is absent from the statutory guidance. There's no reference to licensing offences within that, and we're suggesting and proposing to you this afternoon that you may wish, notwithstanding that the DFT don't reference it, it would be appropriate for you to have consideration in the policy for licensing offences. The only other change we've made is shown on page 49, that the statutory guidance only relates to convictions. And members sitting on this committee will know that they have, in cases, have to sit on panels where a person's conduct or behaviour may be inappropriate but hasn't necessarily got convictions. We would propose that without reference in the policy to your powers to consider the suitability of person on their conduct, that would leave you with a big gap in dealing with issues affecting drivers. So we're suggesting that, and it is word for word from your current policy, members, that you take account of behaviour in your policy as well. And the last matter that we'll cover is on page 44. Oh, sorry, is it page 44? No, it's... Yes, page 44. Sorry, I went to the appendix. And this relates to the age limits for licensed vehicles. And I don't propose to go through all of it, members, because you've obviously got the section there where it talks about the feedback and proposals for amendments to the policy and why that has changed since the original consultation in July. And you've also got Appendix C, where you've got responses from the public and trade members, and with comments as to why they think it's relevant for you to review. So we are suggesting as officers, and taking a pragmatic approach, that all vehicles should be allowed a maximum of 12 years, and that should be balanced against the criteria that the vehicle meets with the requirements of the pattern guidance, which you've already adopted as policy, and there's no proposals this afternoon for you to not continue with that guidance in terms of suitability and safety of vehicles. We are suggesting, in order to target vehicles that are not being maintained satisfactorily and therefore either for customers' safety or comfort, those vehicles are not meeting the standards you respect, that we will look at using the red indicator, which you currently use as part of your mechanical inspection and cosmetic inspection routine, that if a vehicle gets a red indicator on its inspection, then there will be a presumption that that licence will be revoked. That will be in consultation with the council's nominated garage, Mr. Potter, who's here with you today, and so that would be dealt with under delegated authority rather than for those vehicles having to come before the licensing subcommittee. This approach, we think, will address and will allow those proprietors who do maintain their vehicle to a satisfactory standard to benefit from those extra 12 years or the extra 4 years of licensing that you are being asked to consider today, and it will allow us the resources to target those vehicles that are not being kept to that condition. And just for information, on Appendix C, which is at the end of the document, you have a summary table of depot tests that have been taken over the years and how those failure rates exponentially increase the older that the vehicle gets. So there's kind of evidence for you that we anticipate cars may become less comfortable, less well maintained the older they get, but giving us the option to review those vehicles on a case-by-case basis will be beneficial for the trade as a whole. Members, I don't want to cover anything more for you, but obviously if you've got any other questions about any of the other recommendations or indeed any of those that I've highlighted today, please let me know. And Simon is here with his expertise on vehicle maintenance, vehicle safety. So if there's any question I can't answer, which I suspect there will be, if it's anything about a vehicle, then you have Simon here to assist you. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Nick. We're just going to move on to the deputations. Niz, would you like to go first?
Okay, I'm here today for just supporting those age limits policy, but I also request you to consider for fast licensing up to changing from 4 years to 6 years. It will benefit all the drivers, because nowadays all the cars are very expensive to buy and also is very difficult to get actually. So that's why if you consider from 4 years to 6 years for fast licensing, that will be benefited for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niz. Shahid, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Shahid Udin. Thank you for letting me speak. I increase the age of multi-seater and saloon cars. We need more like 12 years or 18 years, because the cars is 50, 60 grand. It's very expensive. If someone wants to buy it, it takes 8 years to pay debts. And also, after age expire, if there's any condition our vehicle are good condition, then continue to use as long as you want is not plate test, fail or anything. During the plate test, if there are light or cosmetic issues or disclosure or small dent, then vehicles should pass as a plate test, however receive a advisory. And if any other customer pay by card, is there any chance we can put like 5% on the top of the pay?
Just on that one, that's actually was banned in 2018. That was I think that was actually a European directive that's actually been put down, but that's banned. You're not allowed to do that at all. You're not allowed to put a surcharge on. No.
Then it?
No, right, absolutely not. Sorry. Carry on though.
That's all right then. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that because I know I've got 3 or 4 people looking at me straight away like, yeah, that's been banned. Over to Viv Young next.
Yeah, hello everyone. Sorry it's going to be a bit longer than my 2 colleagues there. While I approve the 12-year limit being proposed for all vehicles, what more can be done to incentivize a person to purchase a large wheelchair accessible vehicle? At future consultations, maybe we can talk about 14 years for WAVs or multi-seat WAVs. In London, they are saying 15-year limit is not enough. In Pompey, our wonderful city, who is going to pay £40,000-50,000 for a large WAV? Who wants to commit to in excess of £200 a week finance over a 5-year period to purchase a large vehicle with an uncertain future and very limited earning potential? In less than 2 years' time, 1st of January 2025, all newly licensed vehicles have to be electric capable. This is possibly achievable with saloon cars, although these are even now middle 20s with some hitting the 30k mark. Assuming the members of the licence are up to spec, perhaps they could let me know what electric capable WEVs are available and if so, what price. The public need is for large multi-seat WAVs where mums can wheel in the buggy with child inside. Well, these are getting rarer and I don't see that changing even with a 12-year limit. Colleague of mine, Mr Blankson, Ross, Nicky knows what I'm talking about, has a 2015 Transit 8-seat wheelchair accessible. He does a vital school run and he pays a £10 a day CAZ charge. If the 12-year limit was not imposed, his licence was going back to the council at the end of April. Nicky, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there are about 30 WAV licences on the shelf in your office. That equates to 42% of the available WAV licences are not being used at the moment. The colleague of mine, the chap with the Transit, has struggled to find a suitable replacement that is affordable, hence why he's still paying the £10 a day CAZ charge. Indeed, some children with learning difficulties prefer to be in an enclosed cabin, especially if they have hearing impairments. I think large multi-seat WAVs will be a thing of the past in our city. Right, negative points for coming into our industry. There is a lack of ranks. Any application gets rebuffed by the engineers department, listening to objections from the vociferous voices of the cycle forums and, of course, the pet bus companies. Any rank we do get takes years. It's a shame there's no one from engineers department here, or parking or someone. Willis Road, 10 years. Jason, when you had the poison chalice, or whatever they call it, of TNT, it was raised then, we're still waiting. Do you remember? When was you TNT? 10 years ago? Look at the state of Commercial Road North by McDonald's. Delivery drivers running amok. Rank unusable in the evening. Rank unusable in the evening due to the delivery drivers parked on the rank. Now we have the buses parked on the rank at Osborne Road. No response or action from the TNT cabinet member. Why not, I ask you? The signage clearly states no stopping except taxis, 11:30 to 0600. What's the hold up with telling the buses not to park there? False information given out by council employees at the hard interchange. Who pays their wages? Is it the bus companies or the council? Is that transport interchange or only a bus interchange? No consultation about rank closure last Monday. Traffic calming measures with excessive humps. Clive Road, Francis Avenue, roads off of Warren, Whitstable Road, the list is endless. Some cars with 50-60,000 miles are changing shock absorbers and or link arms, etc. Email sent to Engineering Department, Haley, about the problem in October 2022, endorsed by Councillor Leo Madden, George Madrick, Scott was fully aware of it. Still no reply.
Yeah, just on that, Viv, actually, I've chased that twice and I still haven't had anything back.
Yeah.
So I am chasing it for you at the moment.
Thank you. There's a couple of things here, not on today's agenda. Maybe you want to kick it about for future licence and meters. Age of vehicles. As you're aware, we're at a 4-year limit. I would like to see this increased to 6 years. At the moment, you can license a 3.5-year-old car with 130,000 miles. Nicky and Ross, you're aware of the car I'm talking about. But you cannot put on a 5-year-old vehicle with 50,000 miles. Ross has seen the advert in the trade mag. It's a 2017 8-seater with 13,000 miles on it. Can't put this on though, that's a no-no. In Southampton at the moment, theoretically you can put on an 8-year-old petrol diesel car or an 11-year-old hybrid, put it on. The age limit on first licence needs some serious thought. Next we go on to dual driver's badge. Gosport, Fair and New Forest and Petersfield are amongst the authorities that issue dual badges. At Southampton on Wednesday, the Trade Forum meeting, item 8 was dual badge to be discussed. Ross can talk with his counterparts and get the SB on this. Temporary vehicle age limit. At the moment, if you have a crash, whatever, non-fault accidents, you have a vehicle that's supplied by the various non-fault accident companies all up and down the country. It has to be 2 years old. Very restricted. You try and finding a less than 2-year-old 8-seat wheelchair accessible automatic in silver. Nigh on impossible. Temp vehicles need to be 4 years. Corporate colour of our Hackney carriages in our city. Due to the large number of out-of-area private hire cars working in our city, of which some are silver, it dilutes the point of having a silver car for a Hackney carriage vehicle. I used to be able to say to customers, if the car is silver, it's a taxi and can be hailed or got for a rank. Now that is not the case. Ask yourself, do we still need silver? Do the public know? The topic of Hackney carriage vehicle colour is also being raised at the trade consultation meeting. That's item 18 on their agenda. Last page, won't be that much longer. Right, Adams-Morey test. The trade has no problem for a safety-related failure. However, the testers are way over the top with cosmetic sticker failures, etc. Perhaps the licensing manager or Ross could let the committee know how many complaints they have received from the public about slight split in door rubber, air vent slat, slight mark on paintwork, etc., etc. Same Adams-Morey and Southampton, different test. On this alone, I empathise why private hire drivers get licensed in other areas, who only have a yearly MOT carried out by an approved garage. As reported in the news on the 21st of February, at the TNT meeting held on the 16th of February, the park and ride operator has stated they will not be replacing the vehicles with electric vehicles due to the high cost, and that their existing vehicles are still some way from reaching the end of their operating life. How is it that they tell you that they will operate thus, whilst riding the subsidy gravy train, when we are an unsubsidised business, are dictated to when our vehicles are to be replaced? Do we not all carry the same Portsmouth ratepayers? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Viv. Peter, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I want to echo some of the things that my colleagues to my left have just said. Firstly, I would applaud the move to 12 years for all licensed vehicles, not just wheelchair accessible vehicles. It's hurting us. It's hurting the trade. Vehicles are a lot more expensive. I bought my vehicle 2.5 years ago, second-hand. It was only 2.5 years old. And I've had the dealer recently offer me more than I paid for it 2.5 years ago. Okay, it's a high-end vehicle, but that shows you what prices are like. You know that if you're trying to buy a car out there. Wheelchair accessible vehicles, I mean, you can't argue. You can't possibly argue with anything that Viv Young has said on that subject. The 4 to 6 year point that has been made twice, I can only endorse. I understand the Council's desire, or the desire from some within this room perhaps, to move to an all-electric fleet one day. But common sense has to prevail. That day must move further and further away. is becoming less and less attainable. We all have a dream, but we have to wake up and face a reality. An all-electric fleet is not a reality in 2025. It just isn't. One, they're too expensive, and two, they're too hard to get. And, if you look at the eco argument, the cost of producing the batteries goes against all the eco arguments anyway. But that's another point. But 4 to 6 years, I think, should be a minimum. I don't know why we brought it into 4 in the first place, but it should definitely go out to 6 years. Outside this building, outside that window, there are 2 vehicles set out on the road, private hire vehicles. One's an E-Class 17 plate, one's a BMW 5 Series 16 plate. Neither of those vehicles would pass a plate test because they exceed the 4-year rule. I guarantee you both of those vehicles are spotless, apart from some bird mess on my roof, but both of those vehicles are spotless, unblemished, would pass any plate test any day of the week if it wasn't for the age of the vehicle. Now, this is what makes a mockery of the rule. Moving out to 12 years, yes, that makes sense. Let's face it, there are some 4- and 5-year vehicles running around the city that will never see 6 years. And we've all seen them. They're not well maintained, they're not looked after. But if a vehicle is maintained well, there's no reason why it shouldn't move out to a further scale. I mean, my car, okay, it's an E-Class Mercedes. Hopefully, it will see out 12 years. I'm not sure I will, but hopefully the car will. But it's the stress of dealing with this council will see me off. But hopefully it will move out to the full 12 years. There's no reason why it shouldn't. But today, I couldn't plate it. And that's a ridiculous thing. It's 6 years old. I couldn't plate that vehicle. And it's one of the best vehicles you'll see in town. It does make a mockery of the ruling. In terms of Adams Moray, to pick up on the points that my colleague has made, like Viv, I'm not just a taxi driver, I'm also a garage operator. And I can assure you, because I am round the corner from Adams Moray, Mr. Potter drives past my door, GP Autos, every day, we are inundated with plate failures. They've come in, and I had one an hour before we came to this meeting, a split rubber on the door. It was failed. Now, that is minor cosmetic, whether it was advisory before or not, a split rubber on the door. You question the pettiness of the failure. You question how important that is. Mechanical, yes, I endorse everything Viv says. Brakes, tyres, all the crucial things. Yes, of course they're failures. Link arms wobbling, all these things, ball joints, of course they're failures. Cosmetic failures, scratches, failures because it hasn't got a CCTV sticker or a no smoking sticker. You can't. It's ludicrous to take the plates off. So my colleagues are asking the question, and I don't know the answer. I wonder why some of these failures are coming up, and I wonder whether it's monetary. And I don't want to throw stones in any direction, but I'd love to know how much Adams Moray are paid for a plate test and how much are paid for a retest. Because retests are on the increase, without any doubt at all. Mr. Potter may agree or disagree, but from where I sit, round the corner from Adams Moray, I can assure you, to me they seem to be on the... I've seen 5 vehicles today with the plates off. 5 at my garage, and that's ludicrous. Picking up on the colour of cars, we also had somebody fail a plate test recently on a car that had just been purchased. I don't know whether it was new or second-hand. I think it was a second-hand vehicle, because it was, and I quote, a bit silver. Now, the colour of the car in the logbook clearly said grey. I have seen it. It was failed because it was a bit silver. I once had a car that was a bit silver, and I was pulled back into licensing because a Hackney driver complained that my car was silver. Well, I guess in the moonlight maybe it was. It was graphite grey. And I had to take this car down to licensing to prove it. I don't care what colour somebody thinks the car looks like. If it says grey in the logbook, it's grey. It's not a bit silver under any light. So let's have some sensibility here. And echoing the point, the number of cars with out of town plates, and I'm not necessarily talking Havant and Fareham here, and dare we mention the elephant in the room, Wolverhampton, but more and more cars are of a silver colour. That's very noticeable, and it doesn't negate the need to have silver. You identify a Hackney not by its colour. Nobody ever has, and you're in dream world if you think you have. You identify a Hackney because it has a light on the top. Simple as. It has a plate on the top that says it's a taxi. That's how you identify it, not by the colour of the car, to have to change the colour. Every driver should have the opportunity to have any damn colour he wants. It doesn't make any difference. Uniformity of Hackneys is nonsense, unless of course you're going to go the Bryden route, God forbid, with multi-striped cars. Chair, thank you for your time.
To be honest, striped cars wouldn't go down well in the city.
Oh, yes.
I'll go over to yourself, Bruce.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity for me to speak. Getting back to your bundle, because that's what I thought we were here for. First of all, I agree with the 12-year policy on car limits. On your bundle, on 4.8, it says good conduct for persons from 18 years of age from existing 10 years of age. Why does PCC wish to change the current policy that is not broken? I don't get it. I really don't. On your bundle number 7, all vehicle proprietors shall undergo a basic DBS check. Can I ask what the reason is for this? As some proprietors will never ever drive those vehicles. So why should they do a DBS check? On point 8.1, a register for all staff for the purposes of taking bookings or dispatching vehicles. Is this to be introduced retrospectively, or is it from the 1st of April? 8.3, all drivers who are carrying out private hire work, whether they are PHV, Hackney or PSV, should have an enhanced DBS check. This goes on to if a private hire company wishes to give a PSV driver a job of 9 people, and we are supposed to inform the customer what we are doing. But we're not going to tell the customer that PSV driver only has a basic enhanced check, where all PHV drivers have an enhanced check. I just don't get why PSV and PHV aren't exactly the same enhanced DBS checked. Don't get that. On 10, yes, there should be thorough screening of PHV and Hackney vehicles, but to foul them because of stone chips or a lack of no smoking CCTV stickers is very harsh. Maybe, just my opinion, Adders Murray could hold a stock of CCTV no smoking stickers in their cabin. Drivers would pay for them, stick them on the windows, they're not failed, they don't have to go through the rigmarole to rebook another test, which at present are not readily available. The DFD have drafted these recommendations with good intentions, but PCC should have the power to read which parts they can adopt for their local area. Otherwise, having local licensing becomes irrelevant, as DFT have drafted the documentations on a national level, and what works in London doesn't necessarily work in the Portsmouth area. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Very good. Nikki, there's a few points there across all the deputations. Do you want to come back on them? I see you've been writing notes furiously. Just on the last bit that Bruce mentioned about the no smoking stickers and the CCTV stickers, I think it would be a good idea if Adams Morey could hold that stock. And I noticed that Simon was nodding that it's potentially something we could do. So can we just have an assurance now that that would be something we definitely would do? Happy, so that's going to get done, that bit. Okay. Do you want to just go through some of the points, Nikki, that's been raised?
I'm just looking at those that I think... Apologies, Councillor, apologies. I think in terms of the comments, I think that Bruce has made in terms of the statutory guidance, which is really, with the exception of the age limit of vehicles, this is why you're here today, because you must have regard to that guidance. It's statutory. And so if you were not to apply that policy to your standards, then you've got to give clear reasons why it's not appropriate for you to comply with those national standards. I'll go back to the certificate of good conduct. We did have a policy, or your current policy is, any person that has resided out of the UK since the age of 10 does need to provide us with a certificate of good conduct. And unfortunately, because I'm getting older and older and older, I do recall that the original recommendation for this criteria was 18. But the committee at that time, the licensing committee at that time, considered that a child is answerable for criminal activities at the age of 10. So the policy was amended at that time to recognise criminal liability of a child. Over the years, what we're seeing, particularly now where people are coming into the taxi and private hire industry because they've come into the country from abroad or they've been living away for years, it's a heavy ask to have to ask an applicant who's standing in front of you is 25 years of age or 29 years of age to say, when did you come into this country? Was it before the age of 10? If you were outside of the UK when you were 10, or you came in at the age of 10, you must go and get a certificate of good conduct since you were age 10. By doing this, we're saying the change, and I think this is a change that the statutory guidance is suggesting, is that you are applying that check on people residing out of the UK, or residing outside, that you apply that rule from when they reach the age of 18. Not the age of 10. So if you get a child that was perhaps born in France, but then came to be resident in the UK at the age of 18, should we be asking a person that was 10 at the time to go back to France and ask for a certificate of good conduct when they resided in the UK since the age of 18? I think it's a burden that isn't necessarily proved necessary in the way that we do those checks on certificates of good conduct or checking on conduct outside of the UK. I personally can't think of any conviction that we've seen on a certificate that has seen a child with criminal activity. It will always relate to those when they've achieved the age of 18 or older. What we're looking at. Reference Bruce made to public service vehicles, and I do understand his concerns, but again, we're looking at statutory guidance. PSV drivers have a different standard of checking than private hire and hackney carriage drivers. Those drivers are checked to a lower standard. So I don't think it's anything we can get involved in, because you're not, as a licensing authority, responsible for public service vehicles. But it does show the difference in regimes, and that under this proposal, if a licensed private hire operator uses the services of a public service minibus above 8 seats, they have to tell the passenger or the person booking the vehicle that to give their consent for them to use that vehicle to undertake that booking. The only other point, testing of vehicles, I don't know with the Chair's discretion whether you would like Simon to make some comments to the committee, because there has been a lot of reference to Adams Morey, and I think it would be best served for the committee if Simon were able to give some indication about the testing regime.
I'm looking at members. Would members be happy with that? Yeah, well, members were happy.
I'm so relieved. So I will. I'll call it an end to those and let Simon deal from his expertise.
Thank you. Just to touch on a couple of points, really, I do have sympathy with the trade and some of the restrictions they're under. But I would remind them that during the difficult last couple of years we've had with COVID, we did suggest that the rules were relaxed a little bit, especially on cosmetic items. And I think it was November of last year, after consultation with the licensing authority, we were asked to reintroduce the slightly tougher standards that are in the pattern guidance. We very rarely, I would think, fail a vehicle on cosmetic items alone. It tends to be that there are other items, although mechanical as well, but people do tend to focus on maybe the more cosmetic things. And we do very often give people a window of opportunity to have those vehicles repaired. We give them a pass, but say, give them 2 weeks or a month to get those vehicles repaired to a better standard. The example of a door rubber does sound very minor, and I can understand why people would feel that. But I think sometimes you have to understand that door rubbers are there to keep the weather out, and when they're split, they tend to get dirt and rain into that split in the rubber, and if somebody was to brush against it as they get in and out of the car, there's a potential for dirt on clothes for people who are taking their wife out for a meal in their best clothes. So we've been asked to sort of bear that sort of scenario in mind. That's why those sort of items fail. In respect of cost of test and what we make from it, we are paid less than the maximum MOT fee for the test, and the retest is free. So there is no benefit to Adams Morey in failing vehicles. In fact, it costs me money and time to do the retests.
Thank you for that. We're going to go into members' questions. I know Councillor Fazackerley was very eager. So would you
Apologies, Chair. I know Ross wanted to put some information to the...
That's fine.
Is that okay?
You'll get your turn, Jason, don't worry.
Sorry.
Members, I just wanted to highlight the matter of police checks for vehicle proprietors, and Bruce mentioned that they're not front-facing. They don't deal with the public, which is perfectly correct to say. But from our own experience, and without naming names, regretfully, we have had a vehicle proprietor who, in the old terms, was using documents, uttering forged documents by changing his insurance details and giving us as a licensing authority year upon year upon year upon year of false documentation. So police checks in that respect for vehicle proprietors to reflect on their honesty is significant and needed, and that's why there's reference to that, Bruce, in the document.
No, thank you for that, Ross. Councillor Fazackerley.
Thank you. Two relatively straightforward questions, I think. So both to the licensing manager. They're quite straightforward. First one, when you gave your initial presentation to us, you made reference to the fact, and the report makes reference under 4.2, that there are no responses received from private hire vehicle proprietors. For my own information, can you tell me how many private hire vehicle proprietors were actually eligible to respond? That's my first question. You might be able to answer that immediately, or if you wish to wait for my innocuous second question. That regards to 5.1 mandatory training that we're being asked to agree in respect of members. It doesn't give any other details. Now, obviously, based on previous training that I've been to, I have a rough idea, but we're kind of being asked to sign up to something that could be 51 weeks of training, for example, which obviously it's not. But can you give us a bit, flesh out a bit more what that will entail for members? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I do apologise, Councillor. I should have made that clear in the reference in the main report to how the survey was undertaken. We sent out to each individually licensed driver, operator, vehicle proprietor, details of the survey, a link to the survey, and how they can contribute. And we also engage with the trade representatives to positively encourage their contribution to the survey. So every single licence that we've issued to the Hackney Carriage and private hire trade, each of those individuals would have been contacted. They would have been aware from a personal email to them. In terms of the training, I think it's a common theme that goes through not just private hire and Hackney Carriage licensing, but the whole ethos of your role as a licensing authority. You have a number of statutory functions with alcohol licensing, with gambling, with sex establishments, and I think the clear message, not just from the DFT, but from the local government association as well, is that they cannot underestimate the importance that those people are being tasked to make difficult decisions are aware of what those roles are and what they're understanding. We're very fortunate, I would say, here in Portsmouth that you as a licensing committee have a good knowledge, and whether that's fortunate or unfortunate that you have a lot of subcommittees to attend. But I think it's ensuring that we can show openly and transparently that the authority itself is capable and competent and understands its role within the council itself. The guidance doesn't go any further in terms of saying how that should manifest itself. It's really, I think, down to each individual authority to make that choice. We've got guidance, as I said, from the LGA. We do provide, as a matter of course, an opportunity for annual training every year for members, and we will retain that. That's not changing, but it's whether you as a panel want to say we believe it is important, and we want to say that we need to be kept up to date, and we want everybody that sits as a member to attend that training, and somebody that hasn't attended it is a weakness in the committee to making decisions. They're not, it's a matter for you members, but it is advocated strongly by various bodies.
No, thank you for that. I just think on that notion, I think Ben wants to come in as our legal advisor.
Yes, I think it's particularly important to stress the importance of training for members and officers alike, and there are statutory regimes that actually require it, and so accordingly my legal advice is that I strongly endorse the recommendation and that it be adopted. I know it seems heavy-handed to say that members are prohibited from sitting on committees if they haven't attended the training, and I appreciate that there are some old hands here that have been to training repeatedly and probably sigh at the thought of having to sit through a couple of hours likely training session, but it's becoming increasingly important in terms of fending off legal challenge to show that members have had regular and proper training and that it has properly covered particular elements. I'm not going to flag up potentials for challenges to our decisions here and now, but there are certain things that have to be covered on a regular basis.
I think that's especially when we're dealing with subcommittees. I think that's very important that we are training. And I know there are obviously members, if you haven't done your training, you won't be sitting on a subcommittee for that reason, due to the nature of the decisions that are being made. So I think it's quite important about the training. So I think it's a very good point, Councillor Zackley, and thanks for raising it. Councillor Weems, and then I've got Councillor Hunt afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions to Nikki, and then I've also basically got some comments as well from one of the a few of the deputations. I think my first question to Nikki is regarding the consultation. I just wanted to know whether 390 respondents is a typical of a consultation of this type over the years. Would you say this is a large amount or a short amount compared to what you've done previously? I'm leaning on from that, from my own calculations, there's 73 drivers have responded. I just wanted to know how many drivers there are within the city. So if we're in the thousands, having 73 respondents isn't very good. In terms of some of the comments that the taxi drivers have made, I actually agree with them. I think cosmetic issues aren't really a big deal. When I get a taxi, I just want to get home. I don't really care what they look like. But leading on from that as well, I think it was you who mentioned that if you try and get into a taxi, you look for the light at the top of the vehicle. I totally agree with that point as well. I don't look for a silver car, I just look for the light. So I think in this local authority, sometimes we don't help our taxi drivers. We do lean more towards the cycle forums and things. So I'd like to see a bit more work helping the taxi trade. I know that when I went to sell my I-20, I got offered more than I paid for it as well. I got offered 10 grand. It's 5 years old, so it's definitely getting vehicles is difficult. So I'd 100% push for something going towards the 12 years and even longer in that regard. As long as the vehicle's kept in good repair, I don't see an issue. I know that's not a question, Nikki, but you can comment on that. In terms of mandatory training, I think I might be one of the few councillors who disagrees with mandatory training every year. We're up for 4-year cycles, so my opinion would be to have our mandatory training for all new councillors, and then have a 2-year refresh rate in the middle of your term. I think that kind of promotes councillors wanting to do the training. If you're continually bombarded with training regimes every year, which we are quite often, I know I do training through my work, and I often go, oh God, I've done this training already, why do I have to do it through the council? It's just going to get repetition. So I think if we had a 2-year cycle, that would be brilliant. I think a lot of people would actually be more likely to actually join these meetings. And then I think the last point I had was something that was mentioned by one of the other officers. I'm a bit worried where a comment was made about someone ruining their dress, like due to some dirt on a car. I don't feel like we should be listening to people of that ilk. I think the majority of people, like I feel, it's just my own experience, if there's an issue with a rubber seal, I don't think it really matters. Yeah, that's just my comment. But I mean, obviously I'll follow expert advice from our officers, but if, Nikki, you could just touch on the point about the consultation, I'd be really grateful for that. Thank you.
In terms of the consultation and the scale of responses, this is the largest response that we have seen when we've previously consulted on policy, and I think that is somewhat influenced by the amount of members of public that were on various social media. This was brought to the attention of residents of the city by way of a news sheet, or I think My Portsmouth or something, bear with me members, but it was certainly distributed on that media, which has resulted in such a high response from members of the public, I believe. It is difficult to quantify why drivers and proprietors don't want to respond to surveys when it's their livelihood that is under consideration. We urge, and that's why we engage strongly with trade representatives, because we urge that participation and that consultation. But why drivers are reticent to contribute, I can't really.
How many drivers do we have, Nikki? Quickly.
We have around 1,200.
1,200?
13?
Okay.
Yeah, 1,300.
And we've only had 73 people respond. Okay, cool.
In terms of the cosmetic issues, so I do want to put this more into a bit of perspective for you. When you license vehicles, the statutory requirement in terms of how that licensing regime, as set down by regulators, is not just the vehicle being safe. It is safe and comfortable for use. So therefore, cosmetic issues can play a part in that. I have had a personal experience of getting into a taxi where all the vehicle covers were torn, that last week's rubbish was in the front seat because it hadn't been cleaned effectively, various stains on seating. Now, as a passenger, they're in a professional vehicle. If your friend gives you a lift, that's okay, it's their car. But you're getting into a professional vehicle and you expect certain standards. I'm sure you wouldn't want to get on a bus. I hate to use buses because it really doesn't like me using the word bus, but you wouldn't expect that vehicle to be unclean or dirty or full of rubbish, and the same has to apply in terms of the public service that private hire vehicles do. And I think if we lose sight that we expect standards, it then says, well, we don't really care what the public get as long as they get a taxi or they get a private hire. We're not saying that they're going to be in a vehicle that is comfortable for them to use.
How many complaints of this type have we had recently?
I have to say, when they have been presented, and had I have known, I would have regaled you with some photographs, but we have done spot checks where there's a complaint about the state of a vehicle, and we have photographic evidence to suggest that some vehicles...
Is this a regular occurrence? Are we creating policies based off one or two examples? I just want to know if the frequency's high. I totally appreciate we should be creating policies where standards are also high, but if we're only having one or two a year where someone's walked into a vehicle and there's a bit of rubbish, and then we're affecting the whole taxi trade as a whole, I disagree with that. That's not what we should be doing as a local authority. We should be listening to the taxi drivers who do use the good standards, and then why are we punishing those who, for a small amount of issues? It doesn't seem to be any data. I want to see the data. I don't want to hear, oh, I've had one example where this has happened. This isn't a criticism of you, Nikki, at all. I'm not saying this. I'm just saying, if you can say, we've had X amount of people complain about all these problems to do with rubbish, blah, 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 then I, as a councillor, will go, okay, I can happily implement this policy. But if I'm just hearing hearsay, then I don't see why we're punishing a whole industry over something so minor.
But
that's just my personal opinion. It's not a criticism of you.
The contraindication could be, though, is that you have those standards. So that's why these vehicles are an exception. If you didn't have that as a standard, would you see more people not having to take that much care of their vehicles as they do at the moment because they're required to do so? It's a tightrope to walk, isn't it, really, in terms of where does it, if you don't regulate it.
I definitely agree. It is obviously a difficult, happy medium to find, but I think those are my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Just on that point, and I think there's some issues raised about the information. I think it's something we could put onto the consultative group agenda about the standard and quality inside vehicles. So obviously the trade can feed into the consultative group as well, and they can have some feedback, but also you can present the information of how many spot checks we've done, how many issues we've found, so there can be some real knowledge shared between both parties, and obviously all councillors are invited to consultative groups, so it's an opportunity for everyone to have some real number crunching on that. Is that something you're happy to take forward?
Yeah, absolutely, because part of the testing, which everybody hates, is about looking at the cosmetic side of the vehicle. That information, we can work together with the council's approved a vehicle examiner to look at those particular issues to greater inform the committee in future. The only other matter you raised was about the bus lanes and single livery. Do we need single livery? I just thought you might want to be aware of some draft best practice guidance. So this sits separately from the statutory guidance that you're looking at today. This is best practice guidance that the DFT, Department for Transport, are consulting on. They consulted in March last year, seeking responses. They put down their views. And in particular, in relation to the issue of livery and why should one fleet be one colour and prevented in another, the DFT actually have said, to assist the distinction further, licensing authorities should prevent private hire vehicles being the same colour as its taxis, unless they're easily identifiable, like they're purpose-built vehicles, as is the case in many of our cities. We don't have a single tier fleet of wheelchair with the roof signs on. We have a lot of saloon vehicles. So currently, in that relation to why should the cars have that colour, it's certainly supported in the draft best practice that the DFT have gone out on consultation. It's not been published yet, though, Councillor, I would say, so that's not finalised, but it certainly gives an indication from the government that they think that is a good example of best practice, and thank goodness that you've already implemented that, and it does obviously help for bus lanes. That was the main issue why we bought in a livery, because of the bus lanes, that's why it came in. But I think my recommendation is that we are erring on the side of the guidance that the government have given.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Well, I got a VW. It's 20 years old. It's silver. It's got 270,000 miles on the clock. It's never changed the clutch. But it's fallen to pieces inside, so I wouldn't recommend using it as a taxi or any kind of private hire. But that notwithstanding, I mean, I'm interested in all of this. Now, is this a question and comments now?
It's more so questions, Councillor.
That's what I thought. I wasn't sure what was going on.
Yes.
All right, okay. So it's not debate. The question I have is, in 2030, the government's decided that there will be no more new sales of diesel or petrol cars. So this policy that we're looking at rather today, and probably deciding on, goes past that by a couple of years. So 2030 is only 7 years away, and we're talking here about extending WABs to 12 years. And we've been hearing about the expense of buying vehicles now. And as we get nearer and nearer to that date, despite what I'm hearing today, my guess would be that the value of these cars and vehicles will depreciate enormously, because people will be forced, when they buy new cars, so we will increasingly see less petrol and diesel cars. What do you see the shakedown between now and then being for the trade generally?
From a licensing perspective, in terms of where we'll be by 2030, firstly, your recommendations in the report today say you should be looking at it every 5 years. So if we move 5 years from today, we will be asking you to review the policy again in advance of 2030. So you will be, we will have a major review of where we are. I accept the issues we have with the infrastructure in the city. It's not an area under licensing, but obviously we engage very closely with our colleagues in air quality, and we appreciate the infrastructure that the city needs, and we all will need in 2030 should we wish to buy new vehicles. I think the clear indication is no policy is absolute. It's reviewable. So based on the evidence that we have today, we're saying let's go with the 12 years. If there's any indication that we can evidence subsequently, we've got an obligation to come back to you in 5 years or earlier if it necessitates a review. And it's not absolute. If we get, I would say as well, if we get exceptional vehicles, this policy isn't rigid. If we had an exceptional vehicle, such as Mr. Sutherland's that he referred to, that doesn't mean that any vehicle that can be licensed outside of that policy. There is still a discretion to do that. If there is, if it has significant merit and is exceptional, then you can depart from that policy. You're not bound by it. And I'm sure Ben will give you more information. So you are allowing for those exceptional cases, notwithstanding that you've introduced a policy that says, in general, this is what we're going to do. But in exceptional cases, you may be asked to go against that for very good reasons. And I think that's the thing, is that if the reasons are there to change the policy, then that will come back to you, and I've no doubt that the implications of 2030 and 2025 in terms of electric vehicles, as a nation, we'll probably be clearer in 5 years' time on what the infrastructure is going to be to accommodate 2030.
Two more questions, I beg your pardon. So, the least favourable response to the anecdotal evidence is always very interesting, I know, but we have to be driven by the consultation that's being done, and there's a fair old consultation, thanks to social media by the sound of it, which is great. But it was interesting on page 28 that particular recommendation, that the committee amend its current policy to require a certificate of good conduct for any person who's lived overseas for any period of time since the age of 18, got probably the lowest amount of agreement, whereas all the other ones are up between 60, 70 or 80%. Everything else we talked about this morning, the agreement with the recommendations of. Why do you think that is? Any idea?
I think there could be potential. This is quite an sector-specific consultation. And there may well, and if you have a look at the full responses, there's there were a number of queries that were raised that didn't understand what this meant.
All right. I can see that. I can see how that would happen. And lastly, on the training for the legal advice, is that it's being recommended yearly. I completely agree. But could you just re-emphasise the reasoning for it? That if the city is making the licensing authority is making decisions, and somebody looks at it in a court of law, and would make a bad decision, and members haven't been trained, is that yearly? Is that a recommendation from government or from a stated case or whatever?
There's increasing areas of indications that training is fundamentally important. Nikki's already mentioned several pieces of guidance. There's the taxi and private hire vehicle standards document itself, which you're considering today. There's the LGA Councillor Handbook. There's the task and finish group that reported back and the government response to that. There are specific pieces of legislation that require you as an authority to have regular training. I'm more than happy to accept proposals, for alternative models of training. I think the key is that it's regular. It's not sort of, every once in a blue moon. And my advice is particularly strongly that if members haven't received regular training and it's not documented precisely what that training is, what areas it's covered, it can potentially open up specifically to certain areas of legislation, challenges to decisions that may have been made. So for the sake of a couple of hours, probably annually or perhaps biannually, as is being proposed, with that training covering specific areas in particular, and across the board. It's not simply just for taxi work, but for all areas. But of course, taxi decisions can be particularly contentious, particularly when you're considering somebody's livelihood and whether or not they're a fit and proper person. So the training there is especially key. But certainly my legal advice to the committee is that regular training is essential to protect the decisions that the committee or the subcommittees in particular make on a regular basis.
All right then, and around the DBS checking, it was interesting to hear Mr. Lee's account of the reasoning, but safeguarding the public, is that what should drive us the most? Where do we put the balance between safeguarding the public, because you do see various reports about things that happen around the private hire or the taxi trade, which I won't dwell on, but where do we strike the balance between safeguarding the public and reducing the burden? And we did hear evidence today of how the trade feels overburdened and put upon. In some instances, with good reason. How do we find that balance? What's your advice around that? Which is more important, perhaps?
It's just trying to, I wasn't sure whether it was me or Ben. We can do a tag team. In the document, and I'm just, in your Appendix A document, I'm just trying to find this particular guidance is focused on safeguarding and protection. And that's the whole process, I would suggest, of any licensing regime. You're doing it for the protection of the public. If you look at page 31, recommendation 20, I think that demonstrates to you how certainly the government regard this guidance. As you are aware, members, in looking at suitability of applicants for taxi and private hire, you've retained, or the legal definition, fit and proper. Fit and proper, what does that mean to the normal day-to-day person in the street? How does an applicant know what does fit and proper mean? What are you looking at me for when you say, are you fit and proper? That recommendation 20 is an attempt, and I'll ask Ben to verify, that is an attempt by the government, or setting a statutory standard to say that's what a committee should apply itself to. And it is putting the public first. Whether an applicant is going to lose, when you're looking potentially at a revocation or a suspension of a licence, you are not looking at, or you shouldn't be looking at, the financial implications of a person losing their licence. Your priority is looking at that definition and not what potentially could result for the driver or the vehicle proprietor. I don't know if there's any more you want to say, Ben.
I don't think there's a great deal I can add. Safe to say that members are well aware that there's been a sea change in the approach nationally, driven by government on the back of all sorts of issues that have been seen with the inappropriate use of taxis to peddle drugs across the country through county lines, to abuse children on a large scale. Safeguarding has been pushed very much now to the forefront of taxi licensing, and that's why these minimum standards are now being not mandated but certainly pushed very heavily by central government, with an emphasis of local authorities adopting them on the basis that if they don't, that they have particularly strong local reasons not to do so.
Thank you. You finished, Councillor Hunt? Thank you. Councillor Gerarda.
Thank you, Chair. I had similar concerns as Councillor Weems about the survey and about the number of responses, and just wondered if on the next occasion we were going to do a consultation like this, if we could have other forms of the survey. So if it was better to have like a paper form, for example, and surveying people at taxi ranks or whatever, then maybe we could do other mediums other than online, just to reach a wider pool of people. Also, I had a look through some of the open box comments that were left and what people responded to, and it would have been good to have a bit of a content analysis of what was put in there as well, because obviously if you're asking people to fill it in, it would be nice to see what they're saying there. And I did have a look, and there were quite a few people that didn't actually understand some of the questions, and there was a lot of misunderstanding. So I just wondered in future, when a survey is being drafted, if it could be perhaps tested a bit with fellow taxi drivers in the city, just to get their views on that if it wasn't done already. And then I just had a question about if the survey was also sent to local trade unions as well, just in case there were any taxi driver members of those unions. Thank you.
I understand exactly in terms of the way that we engage, and I think any way we can engage, and normally through, I'm sure I'm going to say trade representatives have a good coverage within the city in terms of liaising between the local authority, the licensing authority and the trade, and do provide emphasis for that contribution as well, so that impetus is coming from both sides. The difficulty we had, because I worked with our communication team on the actual how we word the survey so that people understood, and the difficulty we had is because the survey was so specific to a particular strand of industry and it was so case specific on technicalities, it was a really hard survey to try and pull down to a simple level, because unfortunately the guidance is dealing with complex matters. But I fully take on board that how could we do that in future to avoid confusion or misunderstanding. I'm not aware of specifically trade. We didn't specifically deal with trade unions, but I do understand that certain operators have contacts with trade unions and would pass as part of their support for drivers. And I do think there are other people who've got interests in unions that would have had that feedback as well. So whilst I'm not categorically saying the unions were consulted separately, and I'll take that advice on board for the next, I am fairly confident that the trade unions were aware of its existence.
Thank you. I think you are right about the comments, because I think if you look into the first part of the comments, there's one that sticks out. It's 124 from question 20, and it says young children should not be discriminated against. So I think they feel like it was we're going to move the age limit so only 12-year-olds could get in WAVs, which is not the case. So I think obviously that's clearly a member of the public. I think we could learn a lesson from that in the future. Do we have any more questions, members? Question? Councillor Brown, then we'll move to comments.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Nikki. You'll be pleased to hear that, unlike in previous meetings, I'm not interrogating about 1/3 of the recommendations today. Just got a question on one of them this time. This is relating to recommendation 6 under 3.4, which is about when licensing standards change and doing the reviews into licenses following that. Can you give both the committee and perhaps even the trade reps here today some assurance that when that's written up, there'll be some wording in there about giving drivers a period of time to get up to the standards of the new standards when they're implemented, rather than saying it changes on day 1, the review's on day 2, your license is gone on day 3. Actually, give them a make-ready period written in.
Certainly, members, you can see the extent of the recommendations that have been made and how that will impact on resources, both for the licensing authority and for operators and for proprietors and for drivers. Everybody's going to be touched with this. So it's going to have to be, we can't change things overnight. So we will address those through those priorities and stage it. So if I say, for example, with DBS checks going from every 3 years to every 6 months, that has a massive resource implication for us. We have mandated through the recommendations that drivers or proprietors sign up to the online service. This costs £13 a year to the driver, but that's a lot cheaper over 3 years or every year than it is to do an enhanced check every 6 months. And then it's easier for us, rather than getting a driver to fill in a form every 6 months, we can do that automatically without the driver being, or the vehicle proprietor being inconvenienced. But all of those things will take time to evolve, and say on the next time you have to do it, this is the way you're going to do it. So it's a transition. It definitely will be a transition of process.
Thank you, Chair. I've just noticed that we've lost a couple of members that have taken a comfort break. Perhaps we can just adjourn for a short period until they return. Previously, I've given advice that members do need to be here for the entirety of an item if they're going to vote. So I just want to be consistent in that approach. Perhaps it might be convenient for everybody to take a quick comfort break for 5 minutes.
I've had contrary advice. on that from the city solicitor, that he's happy for people to vote regardless of if they've been in the room or not. I mean, but I'm happy.
If I'm overruled by the city solicitor...
I know, I've had this come up before, but I'm quite happy, if members would like to adjourn for 5 minutes to have a comfort break, I'm happy to do that.
If people don't hear all the evidence, they shouldn't be able to vote. Sorry.
I mean, I understand that obviously people have a lot of stuff going on in their lives,
I
but...
don't think that makes any difference.
I think they'll only be 2 minutes. Can we just wait for them? Yeah.
It's a matter for you, Chair. It's purely because I've given that advice myself previously. It may well be you've had contrary advice.
I have had contrary advice.
And if you're happy to overrule my previous advice with the subsequent advice of the city solicitor.
Yeah, I mean, the context of the paper has stayed the same, hasn't it? The paper is the same, the paper is what it is, it hasn't changed. So the report is where we are. So I don't really see any relevance for us to not allow members to vote. I think that it's sensible they are allowed to, they are attending. So I'm going to move on actually on that point. Councillor Madden.
Well, I was just going to say, just to be on the safe side, we should adjourn for a couple of minutes. I bet they'll be back by the time we finish discussing whether we should adjourn or not. That's normally the circumstance. I don't think, if that's the legal advice, to be fair, I wouldn't want somebody, there we are, there's one back. I wouldn't want somebody to complain that in fact we hadn't dealt with the whole issue properly, and that is it right that some members won't sit? I don't think it's worth the effort, quite frankly. And I think the members.
If you keep going, we might have one turn up.
It's
you can go. You can talk for ages. Go. Keep going.
I don't know if I can put a complaint in against you for saying that.
Please do.
Yeah, no. Just one person to come back. Just wait. I have some comments to make anyway.
Okay.
Right. Which I would like everybody to hear.
Okay. I'm happy to adjourn for 5 minutes then, just so we can wait for them to come back. If you're happy and the members are happy, I'm happy to do that. No, do you know what? It's in my gift. It's in the standing orders under 60. I'm going to call an adjournment for 5 minutes, and then we are going to carry on. We are going to plough through, and I'm not going to stop again for people. All right. Members, we are now back. We're going to go to comments now. Members of the trade, do you want to take your seats, please? Thank you. Sit down. Thank you. We're going to go to comments. Councillor Madden.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I did have some questions, but I'll forgo those and speak to people privately when need to do so. We're now talking about the recommendations, aren't we? And we're talking about comments on the recommendations. Can I just say to start with, I've always been of the view that police checks, DBS checks, are absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. And I wouldn't want to see us ever move away from that. Public safety is of utmost importance to this committee and to the council and to the elected members, and of course to most of the taxi drivers. I have to say, I mean, there's no problem when we're talking about little amendments to things. We really mean the others, the ones that don't do it. And I also agree that standards are highly important as well. And if people want to reduce them, I mean, do come and give us the reasons for it. But I do think that people are entitled to get into a nice, clean taxi to start with, if they call for one. I have to say, as I've said to Viv before, I'm not much of a taxi user. But when I do use them, I have no complaints whatsoever. So, you know, we know that the vast majority of taxi drivers will do what needs to be done. A couple of amendments, Lord Mayor. A question. Can I ask a question in relation to 39? I may have put an amendment in, I may not. People may, right? On 8.2 and the PCC policy. Okay. There's two things. First of all, I think people put these in deliberately because they don't want to be. There's a sort of sexist comment in the PCC policy where it talks about the operator shall maintain for 12 months records given, invited or accepted by him. We tend to. I know when legislation's come through Parliament, it talks about him all the time as if nobody else exists in the world. But I just think, can we just delete that? Can that be deleted? Or shall I put that in as I'm putting that in as an amendment now. I think it can stand without being there. Small point. The other bit, but this is the real question. The top bit, what's missing from the PCC policy is the name of the passenger. Could you ask me why that's been? Could you let me know why that's been dropped?
It should be, actually, members, because I think I had the suggested guidance, so the statutory guidance is saying that the name of the passenger should be included. I think, is it in that one? I'm sure I saw. Well, I think we just use it as a different, we say the name and contact telephone detail, the name and contact telephone details of the hirer, whereas DFT have said name.
Yeah, I see it now, but I didn't read it like that at the time, but there we are. So passenger is included. It is. The name and contact telephone details of the hirer.
Which means that if I book a taxi for somebody else, it's the hirer and passenger.
But I don't want to go around circles on this. Clearly, we need we need to know who the passenger is. That presumably that you're absolutely right, but that would happen anyway in the name of the passenger, wouldn't it? Would a taxi firm say, "Are you doing this on behalf of yourself or somebody else?" Do you need to say, "Although it's not for me, Mrs. Bloggs wants to go to whatever"? What would normally happen?
Just on that point, we do have an operator here, so it might be just worth asking them, actually.
If you're happy to do that.
Point, yeah, Bruce, can you just assist on?
What happens when you go to a hotel and the hotel reception turn around and say, "Can I have a taxi, please? Room 101. Go to the Acash restaurant, say, "Can I have a taxi, please? Table 16. You cannot get the name of the passenger all the time. I phone up a taxi for my son. I says, "I want a taxi from 6 Lampeter Avenue." I will not give my son's name because I'm picking up from an address. So, quite honestly, having the passenger's name is quite irrelevant in the grand scheme of things of what we're talking about today.
Thank you for that. Do you want to carry on, Leo?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I just, you know, it's the name of the hire, so I'll go back to Stuart when he hires a taxi for me and say he should have used my name as well. Can we, recommendation 18. Now, this is the one in relation to which everybody's getting agitated about, but it's actually the one to do with the training of members. Now, we had a long discussion at the last meeting. In fact, it's in the minutes of the last meeting, where people thought that it didn't have to happen on an annual basis. Indeed, Councillor Weems raised it earlier on. I'd already done this amendment before it came out. Haven't read the papers, but it's a difficult one, but what I wouldn't want to do, if someone's already done the training, my amendment would be, I'll put that in and give an explanation, after annual basis, comma, if she or he has not already done the training, undertaken the training. Now, that may well be, it's not vague in a way, but all I wouldn't want to do is exclude someone from the training who'd done it before. You and I have done it, I think, every year. I think I've done it every year, haven't I? Never signed a bit of paper, mind you, but I've done it every year, and I think it's important to be. But the training I've done so far each year is more or less the same. Now, I suppose if there's going to be major changes, which we need, presumably you could do the training or have done the training the previous year, whatever, and then come here on the major changes in relation to that. So I just wonder, I'm quite happy if to pick up what Councillor Weems said, because I hadn't thought of that before. You know, to attend licensing training on an annual basis, or every second year, or something like that basis, every second year, whilst they're on the licensing committee. The licensing committee is not for life. Would you be happy with something like that?
Apologies, Councillor. I was seeking to find more information for you in relation to the training. I do apologise.
Well, I don't know, because Councillor Fisackley asked me had I got a seconder, and I haven't. So I don't know if it's just me putting forward a policy, but I just wonder something on the basis then, if to attend licensing training on an annual basis or every 2 years whilst on the... See, what I'm trying to get away from also, so you come off the licensing the next year and you're back on it the year after or the year after that. So you need to do the training. I think you need to do refresher training. So maybe something like that needs to be. It's not major and it's not going to change the world, right? But I just wonder, in relation to members, I wouldn't want to exclude people who, for some reason, couldn't make the training.
Yeah, Councilman, I think
the licensing committee.
I think.
So what I'm saying, I think, is.
Councilman, I think I might have a bit of a compromise for what you're saying. I think members like myself and yourself who have been on the committee for a long time do go to the annual training, and you're quite right, actually. It hasn't changed a lot. And I think maybe for members such as myself, Councillor Madden, who have been on the committee a long time, that the optional of a refresher training or an option to forgo your training for a year pending no legislation changes would be quite a sensible move, whereas obviously new members would have to go undergo training as per normal. I think am I getting that right, Councilman? Is that where you're going?
Members should have to anyway.
Absolutely.
But I think there's also a situation, as I discussed with you at the break. New members go to their annual group meeting and somebody says, oh, why did you go on the licensing committee? And I think, and planning and all the rest of it, but I think something perhaps needs to come from Democratic Services in advance or after the local elections before group meetings are held to remind people that if they want to sit on these committees, the new members that they'd have to do training. So, but that's the communications bit. We have the same problem with communications as you have yourselves with road closures and all the rest of it. But it's on that basis. It's just to be a bit more fluid. But you need to do training if you're just coming on the licensing committee, I believe.
If it helps members in terms of, as you rightly say, with Democratic Services, you have a programme as new members of attending various types of training. Learning and Development have been in touch with me only last week in terms of how that training is given come June. I think normally we start the training programme June, and a proposal that's being put forward is perhaps that we revisit how presentations are given, and that we perhaps have them as a recording, or we do the presentation for those that we can get all together at the same time, but then that recording would be made available to members who, for whatever reason, couldn't attend, and they would still have to confirm that they'd attended it, but we could at least ensure that diaries not permitting that training would be out there for any new members. And I think we should, again, allow some refresher training for members that have been established. There is regular changes in legislation, as you're aware of, and I think that's probably incumbent on officers to ensure that those who have sat on the committee only have to address those new issues that they've not been previously made aware of, if that helps, Chair.
I think that gives some clarity. Councillor Madden, are you happy with that?
What was your compromise? Sorry.
Well, I just, about the refresher training, I think it's a sensible compromise for members that are established on the committee for a long period. So I'm really mainly looking at myself, yourself, Councillor Fazackley, for example, those members who have sat on licensing for a long time.
Sorry, that's fine in a way. It's just the basic training that we've all done, i.e. this is what happens at committee, this is that. I think that has to be done by new members anyway. The other bits, there are different ways of doing that. Or members who haven't done the training before, there are different ways of doing that. When I chaired the employment committee, new changes would come as a paper to each employment committee. So that was a bit of training in relation to that as well. So I would leave it down to yourselves and George, whatever, to decide, cross the T's and dot the I's. But I think all new members do need training, full stop. And I think, to be fair to licensing, they do that training as soon as possible after the May elections, don't you?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I've got Councillor Hunt and I've got Councillor Weems.
So there's no question about it that the safeguarding of the public is, and I'm sure you'll agree, is absolutely paramount, and particularly women travelling around at all times of the day. So the trust in the taxi and private hire trade is really, really important, and that's good for you guys and the ladies that do it too. That's why we have these policies, that's why we're talking about them today. And I can't see anything in these recommendations today that is not common sense at all. It safeguards the trade, it safeguards the public, and I think that is just it has to be the most important thing. Don't think that someone like me doesn't understand all the crap you guys and ladies get sometimes, of people puking up in the car and being rude and so on. So I think there are things in there, like people could be charged, can't they, for cleaning out the sick and everything in the car, if we can find them. I suppose that's a good idea, a good reason to have the name as well and the address so that we can go get them, and officers support you in that. So that's really important. On the upscaling of the age of the WAB vehicles, I completely agree. And to take it across all of the trade for 12 years. I suspect events will overtake us in the near future, or not too distant future anyway. As far as the training of members goes, I'll go along with what the committee wants. I may be back on it permanently again one day, I don't know, but I have been on it quite a lot over the years. And I don't mind going off for 2 hours of training a year. Is not much at all, really, and I think that we should all want more training so we understand things better. I think that's about it from me. The issues that you raised and highlighted, I agree with those recommendations being made there. I think there has been quite a lot of public interaction with the policy. I don't think we got an answer from Councillor Gerarda's question about whether it's all online, but I understand why we moved to online nowadays. But she mentioned handing out of taxi ranks and so on, and I think that's a pretty good idea, and I hope that might be taken up, and these things put in taxi drivers' cars. But over the years, more and more innovation, like cameras in cars, have come on to protect the owners of the cars, the drivers of the cars, and people in them too. So everything that we do is intended to make the trade, to create trust in the trade. The last thing I want to finish on is the collaring of cars. This has been going on for years and years and years. Even since I was last on there, we were talking about it. I think it was Councillor Gosling says it doesn't matter much. I tend to agree with that. You might be surprised. I would like to see a sort of livery, but with all the other different taxis around, coming from all over the place, it doesn't seem to make much sense to me, unless of course it was a rainbow stripe or something like that. But of course, having a livery, if we were able to have one colour of all of them, does improve the safety of people, in my opinion, because you do know you're kind of getting in a taxi unless you're that blotted. I don't know, but there we are. So I'm not terribly fussed on that particular one, and I'll go along with what everybody else decides on. But DBS checking is absolutely vital, crucial to the trust in the trade in this city, and there is a high regard for the taxi trade in this city. Some people might moan sometimes, but we all moan about everything, but there is a lot of trust and high regard for the taxi and private hire trade in our city from all corners. Okay, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Weems.
It related to the training aspect, so in terms of this council, fortunately, unfortunately, we have a massive mix of different parties in the city, and they go from large parties to small parties. Councillors switch allegiances and whatnot. So I just wondered, in terms of the training aspect, because there seems to be a conveyor belt of people going on different committees for whatever reason that is, possibly we could put out the training to all councillors for licensing. Especially when they're first elected, they'll get it anyway, but possibly in that 2-year mark, it's the licensing training. I don't know if it would be mandatory. That would be obviously up to everyone else in this committee to decide, but I think in that 2-year cycle, we give it out to everyone. So there's no excuse for, I wasn't on the committee last year, but now I'm an independent, or now I've switched to the Lib Dems, blah, blah, blah. They want me on the licensing committee, possibly, or I haven't received the training. So maybe if we could put it out to all councillors in that 2-year cycle, that would be really good. So there's no excuse as to why you can't sit on a committee. I agree with Councillor Hunt as well. I think DBS checks are really good. If you don't want to take one, I always get suspicious of people, why they're worried. Like, if you've got nothing to hide, what's the problem? And in terms of the vehicle licensing policy for the age limit up to 12 years, going from the trade, they obviously want it to be higher. So I just wanted to know whether we can put amendments forward for possibly putting it to 14 years. I imagine Nikki would obviously say something to do with that, but I think vehicles are getting more expensive, and especially a lot of vehicles cost thousands upon thousands more than I could afford. Especially someone mentioned 60 grand. If you spent 60 grand in a vehicle, you do expect it to last X amount of years longer than, for example, the car I drive. So I just wondered maybe that could be put forward, but training is the most important thing to me, and I know a lot of councillors do have a lot more time than some other councillors, and that's not a criticism, but I don't know about you, but I don't want to sit on training every single year when it's just going to be repeated. I mean, Councillor Madden's already said that he's done the training yearly, and it's repetition. So I'd like a more bespoke training regime, and I think the 2-year mark might help that.
Thank you. Do we have any more comments? Just before on the about the age limits, Councillor Madden, you're not Councillor Madden, you're Councillor Weems.
I'm Councillor Goslin.
Oh no, absolutely. Anyway, Councillor Weems, I just think if you look at Appendix C, I think on page 54, it outlines the vehicle inspection data, which is the age limits about the age of the vehicles, and we don't actually have any data. We have data +9. So I mean, we would be making a decision based on the information we have, and we don't really have anything based on the 14-year limit.
Well, we seem to make decisions on this council with no evidence. So what would be the problem? What would be the problem?
Not on my committee. We don't. What I will do, though, and I think it is a sensible point, is I would like the 12 years to go through today, but I actually think some work with the consultative group would be good to expand looking at the 14 years. I think that would be an ongoing piece of work for the committee to do, and I hope members would take that on board, because I think we need to get something through today, because this policy should have gone through last March, and now we're here this year trying to get it through now. So I think we do need to get something through. So I am quite aware of that fact. Any more questions? Do we have comments? Sorry, Councillor Madrick.
Hello, mate. Thank you. Basically reflecting what you just said then, I think these recommendations do need to be voted through for the exact same reason that we were sat here with the previous chair last year, and we're back again. So I think I'll be supporting the recommendations, but I am with you that I think that 14, 15 years would be more appropriate. From what I'm seeing on the Adams-Morey thing, which is being used essentially, as you say, as evidence, is that in some years, vehicles that are 9+ years have failed less than vehicles that are 6 years, which I find quite interesting. So there doesn't seem to be consistently any parallel data that shows that once it hits after 6 years, it actually gets more failure rates. As I say, there's some years there where it's 3%. Well, look at last year, for example, 2021. It's 3% less failed 9+ years in relation to the 6 to 9 years. So I don't think that the evidence is fully conclusive there. So I think let's recommend it and approve the 12 years now because it's in front of us, but with the intention to, as you say, look at seeing if it's plausible to put up to 14, 15, because at the end of the day we need to make the taxi drivers' lives a lot easier, not more difficult. So let's approve that today, so we haven't got to worry about it or waste any more time. But let's definitely look at the vision of, over the next year, moving it forwards. In relation to member training, you're fortunate enough to have 3 of the working member training group here, because myself, Councillor Benedict Swan and Councillor Charlotte Gerarda have been tasked with, along with Councillor Darren Sanders, who's not here, have been tasked with looking at member training in detail. And we've reviewed it over a number of sessions and made a load of suggestions. That's one of the reasons why Nikki's been reached out to by our department to look at training methods. And that report has been worked on. It has been put forward for a few people to view. But if any councillors here want to see what the 3 of us in this room have put forward for member training, then I'm sure if you contact James Harris, I'm sure he'll give you a copy of what we've been speaking about. But there is a huge thing in relation to even bringing back honorary aldermen to give the training so that it's more impartial. So the training's been given by people that are massively experienced within our council, that have vast knowledge, and that can offer more of an impartial view. So I say we've done a lot of work on that, the 3 councillors here stuck in the room. So, and that does include things like licensing training, a tiered system of importance, as in the dates when it should be, how it's going to be structured. This work on training's all been done by us, but as I say, by a cross-party group, and hopefully everyone can look at that. But as I say, other than that, I'm going to obviously approve the recommendations, and I hope you'll do.
Thank you. Do we have any more comments, members? Councillor Hunt.
Thank you for bearing with me. But it's right, you're right, and Councillor Wings, I'm glad to agree with him on the WAVs, because Mr Viv Young, he did point out that 43% of those licences were up on the shelf, as he described, which I meant to mention when I was making my comments. So having a report back and seeing what other places do about this and the length of time they're given, because we heard from the trade that they're very big investments, and we don't know what will happen, as I say, by 2030. So I would like to see and support that thinking about getting a report back and seeing if it can be the life of the vehicle can be extended further.
Thank you. Do we have any more comments, members? Because I'm going to go to the recommendation. Are you sure, Councillor Zackley? Are you sure you want to have a comment?
I do, but it's a very brief comment. It's just basically to thank the reps and the representatives, drivers from the trade that have come today. You've made mention to people being on the committee for a long time. I think this is the longest committee I've been party to over the years that I've been elected. I think it was a youthful Ross Lee who gave me a welcome when he was when he was licensing manager all those years ago. But I certainly learned a lot from the taxi trade. They're guys that come in, give their time. I know it's their livelihood, but they're passionate And probably, again, this is the committee I've learnt the most directly from, not just from the officers, but actually from the individuals that do the job themselves. And I think we're here as councillors to represent and listen to all of our residents, and they are, in most instances, our residents too. So I thank them again. I apologise to Viv, you're right, Viv, you did raise that with me about 10 years ago. In a weak way of defence, I think the UKIP bullet at the time took me out for 4 years, so that's probably why I didn't follow it up. But I'm back on the council now, so I'm happy to keep following it for you. But yeah, I'm glad there's a consensus. I hope we can probably all go through on this one. You make some good points, guys, in regards to the fact there's still much to do on this, but for today's intents and purposes, I hope we can support it, and I'm certainly with you in regards to giving it an extension of time. So that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Zachary. You have stolen my thunder a bit because it's my job to thank the deputies that have come here today, so no, thank you for doing that. I just want to say thank you to all the guys, and they are an incredibly engaged bunch, and and girls, yeah, they are. You're very right, Councillor, girls and girls. They're very engaged, and we learn a lot from them as a committee in terms of setting policy, and I've been on this committee now 8 years, and it's been a privilege to actually serve on the committee, and now so as chair. I just want to go through the report quickly, and I'm going to make it very quick before we go to vote on the recommendation. It is the largest consultation response we've ever had. I think that must be noted, but I take comments from the floor. I think it's very important that there is a lot more that we can do. And I think we should use the engagement team. We've got some great people that have got some great relationships with the trade. I think we should do that moving forward. But this today is about giving the trade a fighting chance moving forward, because we've heard about the burdens they have, and they've told us consistently over the last 3 to 4 years of how tough things have got out there. So we need to give them an opportunity to go out and earn a living, and I think that's what we're trying to do. And I just recommend that we do propose this and pass this today. So I'm going to recommend that down, members. We have a seconder from Councillor Madrick. Thank you. All those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. So that report is passed. Thank you.
Chair, could I just confirm the changes Councillor Madden mentioned in terms of the reference to him? Would you like me just to make sure that those are incorporated?
I think they are incorporated. They were unanimous. It wasn't put to the floor, but I think it's more so agreed by the membership here. We have one more report, which... I mean, Councillor George Madrick's already said the training working group is power, so we'll have to listen to those guys. We've got another report quickly on the agenda. Vehicle specification requirements, salvage vehicles. Would you like to introduce that one?
Members, just we're seeking your approval to, if you like, dip our toes in the water and go out to consult on whether there is scope, and I say that quietly, to consider whether Category S or Category N write-off vehicles could be considered on individual merit to be licensed. Your policy says at the moment that you don't recognise them. That doesn't seem to be the same for the rest of the county, and we need to find out what's going on with big city councils across the country as to what the accepted standards are for salvage vehicles. So we're asking you to give us the time to formulate a report and come back to you with adopted best practice guidance on considering or not the use of salvage vehicles in the trade for the future. What we'd like to do is consult with obviously the trade, the public, the ABI, the Association of British Insurers, Lloyd's Syndicate, and last but no means least, Simon Adams-Morey from a technical point of view, and see whether there is scope to come back and say there is a possibility of licensing or otherwise vehicles that may have been structurally or non-structurally written off. So we basically want your feedback on whether you will allow us to do that, Chair, and report back later in the year.
I've got Councillor Brown and Councillor Hunt.
Thanks, Chair. Right, I'm not actually familiar with what would have to happen to a car to make it categorised as N or S. Very brief. I'm generally in favour of the idea of consulting about this, but before I say yes, could you just give us a brief idea of what would have to happen to a vehicle to get one of those categories?
The two categories we're talking about, Category N is non-structural damage to a vehicle. You have to bear in mind that can still include brakes, steering and suspension. Category S is more structural damage. Both of these categories will be registered on a V5 logbook, but it will only be registered at the time of any changes that are made to the registration document, so a change of address or change of ownership.
Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, I read the report. I think it's sensible to go out and find out what else is going on, because, you know, sometimes a bumper or a dent or a door being pushed the wrong way can write off a vehicle, and that doesn't seem sensible. But there again, there are other extremes where people weld together chassis and so on, and that's the other extreme, and that needs to really to be avoided. So looking at what other authorities do, I think is a good idea, and certainly doesn't cause any harm. So we should want to do that, I think, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Williams.
Can we move to the vote?
Absolutely. All those in favour? That's another unanimous one. That concludes today's committee. I thank you all for your attendance.